Christmas Eve, and the snowstorm outside raged like something out of a nightmare. Winds howled, the kind of winds that made you wonder if they were screaming for help. I had just finished hanging the last ornament on the tree, about to settle in for a quiet night with my family. But that was before my brother, David, disappeared. No one could have predicted what was about to happen, or that the Christmas I had known was about to turn into something darker. Much darker. My name is Hannah. Christmas has always been my favorite time of year, candles flickering, the scent of pine and cinnamon in the air, the joy of being surrounded by family. It was a tradition in our house to gather around the fire on Christmas Eve, share stories and reflect on the year gone by. But that Christmas, it wasn't like any I had ever known. David, my younger brother, had always been the adventurous one. He loved winter more than anyone else in our family, and every Christmas Eve, he would take a walk in the snow, even if the weather was terrible. It was his ritual. We never thought twice about it. But that year, the storm was different. The winds were fierce, the snow blinding. Yet David had insisted on going. "I'll be back soon. Don't worry," he said, laughing as he grabbed his jacket and disappeared into the night. The storm had raged for hours before he left. The streets were silent, the kind of silence that only snowstorms bring, and the wind felt as though it could freeze you to the bone. I remember watching from the window, feeling uneasy. Strange instinct gnawed at me like something wasn't right. Hours passed, and David didn't return. The snow only deepened, and we were starting to get concerned. Our parents decided to go out looking for him. "I'll be right behind you," I promised, staying inside to keep the fire warm and the house safe. But I didn't expect what happened next. The hours dragged on, the clock ticking painfully as I stared into the fire. The howling wind outside made everything feel distant, like I was in a different world altogether. And then I heard it, a knock at the door. 3 short, sharp knocks, like someone in distress. I opened it, but there was no one there. My heart raced, the tension rising. My mind told me it was just the wind, but deep down I felt something different, something wrong. I quickly closed the door and locked it, telling myself it was nothing. But then I saw footprints. The snow outside had been untouched just moments ago, but now there were prints leading up to the door. And they didn't stop there. They continued toward the living room window. I felt my breath catch in my throat. Was someone outside? I approached the window cautiously, my heart pounding. Peering through the curtains, I saw nothing but the swirling snowstorm, the world outside a blur of white. Still, the footprints were there, leading into the snow, but no one was in sight. I pulled away from the window, telling myself to calm down, that I was imagining things. But then my phone buzzed. It was a message from David. "I'm lost." I immediately texted back, asking him where he was, but there was no response. Panic set in. I tried calling, but the line was dead, the signal completely gone. I rushed to put on my coat, preparing to go out and find him, when suddenly, the door creaked open. It wasn't just a draft. It felt as though the door had been pulled open with force. I rushed to close it, but the moment I did, a cold gust of wind swept through the house, extinguishing the fire and plunging the room into darkness. I grabbed a flashlight and shone it toward the door, only to freeze in my tracks. There, standing in the doorway, was a figure, a man, drenched from head to toe, his face obscured by a hood. But it wasn't David. I stepped back, my blood running cold. The man said nothing, but I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. He was staring at me, his gaze hollow, as if he was not really there at all. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He didn't answer. He simply took a step forward, his boots leaving wet marks on the floor. I backed away, but the man didn't stop. He just continued to advance, his eyes locked on mine. My heart raced as I fumbled for my phone, trying to dial for help. But before I could press the call button, he was right in front of me. His hand reached out, cold as ice, and I gasped as he touched my arm. The world seemed to shift around me. The room, the walls, everything around me started to fade, as if I were being pulled into another world. When I opened my eyes again, I wasn't in my house anymore. I was standing in a dark, snow-covered forest. The trees were twisted and barren, the ground frozen solid beneath my feet. The air was thick with the scent of decay. I turned to find the man still standing behind me, his eyes now glowing faintly in the dark. I felt my legs weaken, my breath quickening in fear. "This place, it's not real," I whispered, my voice shaking. The man didn't answer. Instead, he pointed ahead, toward a distant light that flickered like a candle in the middle of the forest. "Follow the light," he said, his voice like a distant echo. "It's the only way." I had no choice. I started to move toward the light, my feet sinking into the snow with every step. It felt as though the forest was alive, watching me, its branches creaking and groaning like they were whispering secrets. The wind had stopped completely, leaving a suffocating stillness behind. As I approached the light, I saw something. Shapes moving in the shadows, figures in tattered clothes, their faces obscured by hoods. "Who are they?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "The lost souls," the man replied. "They're waiting, just like you." I didn't understand. What was this place? Where had David gone? The man reached into his cloak and pulled out a small silver object. "A key. One of you must stay behind," he said. "Only one can return." My heart pounded in my chest. "Stay behind? What do you mean?" "You'll see. The balance must be kept." The world around me grew colder, and the figures in the shadows started to move closer. Their hollow eyes locked onto me, their faces gaunt and pale. The man stepped forward, holding out the key. "You must choose," he said. "One of you will stay. The others must return." Just then, I heard a voice I recognized. "Hannah," it was David. His voice sounded distant, as though it was coming from the depths of the forest. I turned to look, but all I could see were shadows and mist. "David," I called, my voice desperate, but the man stopped me. "You cannot save him. He is already lost." My chest tightened as the realization hit. David was trapped here, in this world of lost souls. And now, the only way for me to escape was to leave him behind. "No," I screamed. But the figures were closing in, their icy fingers reaching toward me. I woke up in my bed, drenched in sweat, my heart racing. It had all been a dream, I told myself. Just a horrible nightmare. But when I looked down, I saw the silver key on the nightstand. I don't know if I'm truly awake or if I'm still in that cursed world. What I do know is that the key has a power over me, and every year as Christmas approaches, I feel it pulling me back. One of us is always lost, but this time, it might be me. It was supposed to be the perfect Christmas. I was with my family, enjoying a cozy holiday in our new home, when I opened a gift from my grandmother. It looked harmless, a vintage hand-carved wooden doll, but the moment I touched it, a chill ran down my spine. That night, strange things started happening, whispers in the dark, shadows flickering at the edge of my vision, and objects moving when I wasn't looking. By the time I realized the doll's horrifying past, it was already too late. The spirits were coming for me. I had just moved back home after several years of living in the city. My grandmother's house had been in the valley for generations, and it was where we spent every Christmas. The house was old, filled with antiques and relics of the past, but it had always been a place of warmth. This year, though, something was different. It was as if the house itself was watching us, waiting for something to happen. Christmas Eve was peaceful, or so it seemed. I was sitting by the fireplace with my family, sipping hot cocoa, when Grandma handed me a gift. She smiled, her eyes glinting with a secret only she knew. "For you, dear," she said softly. I unwrapped the delicate paper to find an intricately carved wooden doll. Its face was so lifelike, its eyes so empty, I felt an unease settle in my chest. Grandma noticed my hesitation. "It's been in our family for generations," she explained. "Your great-grandmother gave it to me when I was your age." That night, I placed the doll on the shelf in my bedroom. I didn't think much of it, but deep down, something told me to get rid of it. I shrugged it off. I had to be imagining things. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house creaked, as it always did, but this time the sounds felt louder, more deliberate. The clock ticked loudly in the silence of the room, and I could have sworn I heard faint whispers, soft, unintelligible voices that sent shivers down my spine. I told myself it was just the wind outside. The storm was picking up, and the snow had begun to fall heavily. The wind howled against the windows, but still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Around midnight, I decided to get up to get some water. As I walked past my dresser, I froze. The doll. It wasn't where I had left it. The hand-carved face, that eerie smile, was now facing the door. I hadn't touched it. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, but I thought it was probably just my imagination. After all, dolls were supposed to be creepy, right? I turned off the light and lay back down, but the whispers grew louder, filling my head. The shadows in my room seemed to stretch, darkening the corners like they were alive, reaching for me. I closed my eyes, desperate to shut them out. When I opened them again, the doll was gone. I sat up in bed, panic rising in my chest. The room was dark, and the only sound was the howling wind outside. My heart raced as I grabbed my phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, and that's when I saw it on the floor, just by the door. The doll. I rushed to pick it up, but something was wrong. As I touched it, a cold, unnatural chill spread through my fingers. The doll's face seemed to change in the light, its eyes now glowing faintly, and its smile no longer innocent, twisted into something sinister. I recoiled, almost dropping it. That's when I heard the first whisper clearly. "You shouldn't have taken it." I spun around, but no one was there. My breath caught in my throat, and I realized with growing dread that I was not alone in that room. The air grew thick, suffocating, and I could feel the presence of something or someone lurking in the shadows. I bolted from the room, my mind racing. I needed to tell someone. Anyone. I ran downstairs, but the house was silent. The lights flickered as I passed through the dark halls, my footsteps echoing through the empty house. When I reached the living room, my grandmother was sitting in her chair, staring blankly at the wall. Her lips moved slightly as if she were speaking, but there was no sound. Suddenly, she turned to me, her eyes hollow and distant. "You took it, didn't you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's coming for you now." I had no idea what she was talking about, but it didn't matter. I had to get rid of the doll. I tried to burn it, but the flames wouldn't touch it. I tried to bury it, but the earth refused to take it. The doll was cursed, and I was trapped with it. And each night, the whispers grew louder, the shadows darker. The doll was always there watching. No matter where I put it, no matter how many times I hid it, it always came back. I could feel its eyes on me, even when I wasn't looking. And the whispers, they were growing more insistent. "You can't escape," they taunted. "You can never leave." Then the unthinkable happened. One evening, when I returned home from work, I found the house in chaos. Furniture had been overturned, dishes were shattered, and the walls were smeared with something dark, something that resembled blood. I froze, horrified, my heart pounding in my chest. But there was something even worse at the center of the living room. Standing as if waiting for me was the doll. Its eyes glowed bright red, and its mouth twisted into a grin, wide and malicious. The air grew frigid, and the shadows seemed to close in around me, pulling me toward the doll. The whispers were now a cacophony of voices, old, desperate, and angry. I couldn't understand what they were saying, but one word stood out, repeated over and over: "Help." I stumbled backward, desperate to escape, but the door slammed shut behind me. The room was closing in, the walls creaking, as if the house itself were alive. The doll's smile seemed to stretch wider, and I heard the unmistakable sound of something moving behind me. Turning, I saw them, figures, shadows, in the shape of people cloaked in darkness, their faces twisted in agony. They reached for me, their hands cold and clammy, their voices pleading, "Help us." I felt a chill grip my heart. I was trapped in the same nightmare that had claimed my great-grandmother. The spirits of the doll's past victims were here. Lost souls cursed to roam the earth forever, and they wanted me to join them. I could feel the doll's presence closing in around me, its eyes glowing with a hunger that was all too real. It was as if it were feeding off my fear. And then, just as I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the door flew open, and a figure stepped into the room, a man, tall and shadowy, his face obscured by darkness. He spoke in a low, commanding voice. "You don't belong here. Not yet." The man reached forward, and for a moment, everything went black. When I woke up, I was back in my room, the doll sitting harmlessly on the shelf. But something had changed. The house was silent now, too silent. I could still hear the faint whispers, still feel the cold presence of something watching me. The man's voice echoed in my mind. "You don't belong here." Not yet. The curse wasn't broken. It was just beginning. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I do know this. I'm not safe. Not as long as the doll is here. And I fear it's only a matter of time before the spirits come for me. If you want to hear more chilling tales like this, be sure to check out my other videos, especially the one about the haunted attic. It's not a story you'll forget.